Hi, I'm Jean Shafiroff, and I'm on a mission. Anyone can be a philanthropist. My television show came from my book, Successful Philanthropy, How to Make a Life by What You Give. Won't you join me? Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff, and this show is designed to highlight philanthropic leaders here in the United States and then beyond. With us today, Carol Jenkins, an extraordinary woman. Most of us remember her as an award-winning TV journalist who spent most of her career on NBC. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with what else Carol Jenkins does, well, she's a humanitarian. She's an advocate for civil rights, women's rights, human rights. She is a mother. She is an award-winning author. She is an Emmy-winning TV journalist. Let's all welcome Carol Jenkins. And Carol, thank you very much for being with us today.
Jean, it's my certain pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and Carol, I usually like to start with your beginnings because we have many young children or young people watching the show, and for them, they like to see the beginnings of someone's career to be inspired. And I think all of us right now need inspiration. So Carol, I understand you were born in Alabama, but can you tell us a little bit about your beginnings and your family life?
Sure. I was born in Lowndes County, Alabama, on a farm. My mother was one of 15 children, all credit due to my grandmother, but it was my grandfather who was the feminist and the supporter of women. He sent all 9 of his daughters to college. The boys stayed home to run the farm. And because of his support of the women in his family, we have managed to have successive generations of successful, productive people. And so that's one of the reasons that I am always so supportive of girls and of women, frightened about their equality in this country and indeed in the world. And that's why I spend so much of my time talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. But I do want to say that when I grew up in Lowndes County, we were very poor, although my grandparents worked very, very hard. And so I just want to say that no matter where you begin or where you start, there is always an opportunity to succeed in this country. And so we need to maintain our democracy, nourish it, make sure that it survives, and make sure that we all are able to succeed in this country.
Yes, and I would imagine your education played a key role besides having very supportive parents. And I assume you went to college and then maybe to graduate school, but tell us a little bit about your education.
So I went to Boston University and I did graduate work at New York University. I did not major in communications or reporting then because that was not something that really was available to people of color when I was in college or in graduate school. It only became possible after that when there began to be a dictate that we had to have a broader representation of people in communications. And so even though my degrees were in speech pathology, a career that I enjoyed, I went back to graduate school, took classes in journalism, and then started my journalism career at a very tiny station then in New York City, WOR, and then moved on to NBC, the local New York NBC, where I spent the next 25 years reporting on everything from the release of Nelson Mandela to, presidential, campaigns, the works. So I was very happy to have had that first career in journalism.
Yes, and you were very involved in politics from what I've read, and you were at every convention for every major president. What was that like, interviewing the different presidential candidates, and how was it being a woman and also a woman of color back then?
Well, getting into the newsroom was one thing. Getting to the top of the newsroom was another, because there were men who had been entrenched in the political positions, reporting political life for years by the time the women, and certainly the women of color, arrived on the scene. So it was always a challenge to get the prime assignment. And so 25 years of it, I was able to, to move up gradually from, the reporting of the political conventions. It was always a top, guy, who had the presidential candidates, and we got, what was left. And it was only because my news director was a woman, a Black woman, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison in South Africa, that I got to go to South Africa to cover that, as opposed to literally the person who was higher in rank to me who might have covered that. But that's, the evolution of the newsroom. In those early days, women only covered flower shows. We got the soft stories, and until we could demonstrate that we could handle the really tough things, the politics, the making of America. So we've come a long way. I must say, though, in watching this last inauguration, I think that this is so much more democratic. Everybody got to see everything, almost everything, as opposed to the very, very select people who actually got to go, to the inaugurations or to any of the conventions. So we've made some progress because of, unfortunately, because of our lockdown, but for the technology that's available to us now.
Yes, for sure. With the lockdown and with the COVID pandemic, everything's changed, everything that we do, and there's been a tremendous amount of hardship. But getting back to you and your career, you have become very involved with the Equal Rights Amendment, and I think you're the co-founder of a coalition which is very involved in getting the ERA amendment passed. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's so important. And I think a lot of people really don't even know that the ERA amendment is not part of our Constitution.
Right. I am pleased to be serving as the president and CEO. We're a 6-year-old organization. We represent about 120 now national organizations across the country, millions of people, women and men, who believe in equality for women. The Equal Rights Amendment was first proposed in 1923, almost 100 years ago. We've been working at it, not personally, but almost, half of that time, it has been a topmost of my mind. And what it is an effort to put women in the Constitution. Now, the amendment doesn't say that. What it says is one cannot be discriminated against based on one's sex. And once you introduce that into the Constitution, what you're saying is that then you cannot discriminate against women in pay and in any other manner. Right now, our Constitution does not prohibit discrimination based on sex. So, our founders did, I guess, the best they could. The framers were white men, slaveholding men, and they left a lot of people out of the Constitution, not only the slaves, but also the women, despite being encouraged to put them in it. And so what I say now, given all of the turmoil that we have when people are talking about systemic sexism and systemic racism, I say you cannot get more systemic than the Constitution. And the reason that our efforts so far to normalize, equalize women participating in our society, the reason we can't do it is that it is written into the core of our playbook. And that's why we're trying to get the amendment passed. We're very close. We think it will happen this year. We hope we don't have to wait for a clear 100 years. We'll take the 98 years that we've been working on it to get it done. But most people don't realize, most women even don't realize that they don't have the same constitutional equality that men have in this country.
It's really unbelievable that this is not part of our Constitution and that it's taken so long to be passed. Now, you've been working on this, and I just find it incredibly important for women. And now getting back to race relations, this is an area that you've also worked in, and this past year, 2020, we had a serious problem, and it seems to me that the country is coming together to change things. We now see many more people of color in media, in almost everything we do, and it's taken us a very long time. Slavery being one of the greatest sins against mankind in the entire history, not only of the United States, but of the world. And how involved are you in improving race relations?
Well, because of my family, I'm very involved. The farm where I was born was one of the stopovers in the march from from Selma to Montgomery, that John Lewis led. The third night they stayed at our farm. My uncle was a prominent businessman in Birmingham, Alabama. He was the one who bailed Martin Luther King out of jail when he was writing his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. It was my uncle, at the insistence of President Kennedy, that he bailed him out, and also hundreds of children who were protesters who had been beaten and knocked down by fire hoses and then incarcerated, locked up in the stockyards by the police, who refused to allow peaceful demonstrations. So it's inherent in my family. My daughter and I wrote a book about my uncle. A.G. Gaston, the motel that he created among many businesses in Alabama, is a part of the Civil Rights Monument that President Obama established to recognize all of the people who worked to desegregate our country. So I'm very concerned about it. I'm very, active in what's the recognition of our family's participation in all of that. And I'm also really worried, because what was quite clear was that when our Capitol was assaulted, they were self-identified white supremacists who stormed the Capitol. It's not, my calling them that. That's the way they identify themselves, as white supremacists who wore Auschwitz T-shirts and who were determined to take captives and did kill people. And I think that this is one of the things that we have to be concerned about, that they are not a tiny minority. There are more people who are angry and who are racist. And so I think our commitment to make sure that we are protected, that our legislators, the people who run our country, are protected, and that we all are, because every person I know of color is more frightened now than ever, because we know that that racism has been given, something of an okay, by the most recent administration we had in the White House. So I think that the secret nod, has been given that this is, it's okay to be racist. And I think that we all now have to recognize that and do something about it.
Well, I certainly don't think it's okay to be racist. I think it's wrong, and I think we should never look at anyone differently. And I think we will move towards a world where people will no longer look at people and look at them because of the color of their skin or their gender. And I think that's very important. And also their sexual preference. But
Right.
we are quite far away from that right now. Now, you are very involved with a group, or you were the co-founder of the Women's Media Center, a group that I want you to speak about, but a group that is very involved in giving women more opportunity in the media. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I was the founding president of the Women's Media Center, which was actually founded. The founders were Gloria Steinem, Jane Fonda, and Robin Morgan. And what our concern was when we began that work was that the reason that women were not participating wholly in society was that they didn't show up either in relative numbers as deliverers of the news, or as makers of the news. And as Gloria always said, you cannot get into the history books unless you're in the media, unless you are covered, because that's where the record is created. And that's why, you know, so many women's accomplishments throughout the years were ignored, some never to be recognized, a lot of them now discovered and going back, and, you know, like major newspapers who have to, you know, do stories that say, oh, here are the stories that involve women that we never ran, or here are the stories that involve people of color that we never ran. Oh, look at these great people and what they did, what they created. So we started the Women's Media Center, and it has done fantastic work. It's done, and it's still up and running. Julie Burton runs it now, and you know, the research that they're doing is so essential. You know, they tell us how many people are in the newsrooms, how many women of color, how many, you know, women period, who's writing the bylines, and there absolutely has not been as much progress as one would expect, you know, now that we're into 2021. So it's good that we know that. We started a program. One of the first things that I did when we created the Women's Media Center was to create a training program and for women. And so out of that training program, we now have a congresswoman, Pramila Jayapal, the woman who runs the National Women's Law Center, Fatima Gosgraves, you know, huge Time's Up. They're the ones who are doing the Time's Up work. And Maria Teresa Kumar, who runs Voto Latina. So, you know, some of those lessons that we were able to impart on them, some, they were just brilliant anyway, but have allowed them to rise up in our society. And, you know, and I think that we need more of those kinds of training programs, you know, support programs. And we are making progress, but not nearly as much as we need to. In Congress, for instance, we are still only at 25, maybe 28%. And women are 51% of the population. So we still have much more work to do.
Yes, and no question, if people want positions in government and elsewhere, we have to create a more opportunity and also educational opportunity to learn how to participate in government, how to participate in media. And I understand you are a media coach as well, maybe something that I could use.
You're great. You're doing fine. You know, and
Well,
I hear
thank
people
you.
talking about your show. Our mutual friend, Rebecca Seawright, was like, you've got to do Jean's show. She's wonderful. So thank you for the invitation.
Yes, but getting back to what we were discussing earlier, education is key. And for our listeners who have just joined, this is Successful Philanthropy. Our host, Jean Shafiroff, is right here with you. And today's guest, Carol Jenkins. And Carol Jenkins, for those of you who just joined, she is a former major TV host. She is a civil rights advocate. She's a woman's advocate. She's a leader in many different fields. She's an award-winning journalist. She is an author. And I don't think there's anything that Carol hasn't done or can't do. And Carol,
well, I'm pretty old, Jean, right? I'm pretty old.
No, you're not. You're as young as you feel, and that's another type of discrimination, not for this this show, but age discrimination,
right.
Which is something that we really haven't addressed in this country. But I think it's a very big issue. Getting back to your family life, tell me a little bit about. I know you have a daughter named Elizabeth, and I think you co-authored a book with her, but tell us about your family life, because with a career like yours, I wonder, how was it to raise a family?
Right. And as a single mother I have my daughter, and I adopted a son. So I had maybe 3 or 4 other children that I helped raise. So I had a big family, but I was a working mother, but fortunate enough to have help. My mother always helped me, and we were able to employ people who were terrific. And I mean, really, that's the only way I could have had the reporting job that I had, you know, but I had my mother's help. My daughter has 3 children, she and her partner of many years. We have an 11-year-old girl and twins who are going to be turning 8 very soon, and they keep me very busy. And by the way, they're all ERA activists. When we were in an office, I took them with me everywhere. I took the oldest granddaughter, Avery, to Washington, D.C., and Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, made sure that she was front and center when the House of Representatives passed the remove the time limit bill. And she said, Avery, come stand with me. And Avery had been doing ERA work since she was in 2nd grade. She said, this is for you, for the work you've done so far, and for you and all of the other girls in America who are looking forward to having equal rights. So I'm lucky enough to have 3 great grandchildren, a daughter who has a wonderful partner, Elizabeth and Jessica, my son, Mike, who fortunately for me got locked down with me. So I do have company. I don't know how he feels about it from day to day, but very fortunate.
You've had a good family life, which is, I think, really wonderful. Now, looking at the current political scene, do you think that Kamala Harris will be our next president in 4 years, or do you think Biden will run again? And I think either way, it'll be a very interesting time.
Right. What a great thing to happen, to see a woman of color who represents a Caribbean, Indian, all kinds of representation. But the key thing is that she got there because she was qualified. She had run for office for some very, very tough positions, had demonstrated her ability, and we know we know that she is capable of doing the job of president, should she find herself in that position. I don't know whether Joe Biden at 78 will run again. He seems to be doing, terrifically, but we know that somewhere in our future, we have a woman who is now Vice President of the United States and should be able and capable of running for President of the United States. And that would be fantastic. My smallest granddaughter, called me the other night. She said, Gaga, I can't go to sleep until I tell you I've written to Kamala Harris and I've told her that I'm going to run for president. So I think that what she's given to young girls of color, young girls of any color, the fact that it's a woman, the first woman ever, has really brought us along in terms of possibilities in this country. So I'm forever grateful for her placing herself in the position, and so pleased that Joe Biden selected her. That was a big step to select a woman. It shouldn't have been, but we all know that it was. So the whole dynamic of political life and of leading countries has changed for us. Other countries have already had women who've, been president, prime minister, et cetera, and we in America are so far behind. We're behind in our equal rights. We're behind in our political activism and possibilities, but hopefully we'll be able to catch up now.
Yes, and hopefully we're going to move forward. And when you look back, you're still in your prime, but do you have any regrets when you look back on your career, or when you think of what you could have or should have done? And if so, is that something you want to share with us?
I don't know, any regrets. I've moved through, I have been fortunate to have many careers. I've retired several times, and so that I was able to make the transition from being an on-air anchor correspondent with a major network to go on to, to other things, to write a book, to help start a nonprofit and then to lead another nonprofit. So, I feel very, very fortunate. I will be happiest when we have the Equal Rights Amendment and we think we can get it. I think one of the things that is still out there that I want to address is child poverty, child hunger. I think this country has never acknowledged the fact that we have 1 out of 3 children in this country who are starving or who cannot be certain of their next meal. And I think that's a scandal. So, after we get the Equal Rights Amendment, I'm hoping that I get to work on that. It's just, there's a never-ending list of things that have to be done. And I just feel fortunate that, that I've been able to participate in several of them.
Which is all wonderful. Now, this show is all about philanthropy. And so if you had to say to our audience, based on what you're involved with, which is your favorite charity or where you'd like them to donate, can you give us a website and talk a little bit about your favorite group?
Sure. Well, I think the ERA Coalition, eracoalition.org, is what is necessary at this moment as the Senate and the House of Representatives, the President and the Vice President, and the courts are all considering making the Equal Rights Amendment a reality. We have a letter going into President Biden and Vice President Harris asking them to act quickly within the first 100 days. The Senate introduced the removal of the time limit as resolution number 1, where we say women are at the top of the list in terms of things. So, I would say that for those who have an interest in girls and women's equality, that helping us do our work at the ERA Coalition this year, because we think we can do it this year, would be most important. And then, if you have additional funds, please support the starving children of America. It's a scandal, to have so many food banks and so many people who cannot, they can't live a comfortable life. But we can make this better. Most of the poor of our country are women, and their lives will all be made better by having equal pay. And the only way we can get that, we've been working on it for many years and we haven't been able to achieve it, is by fixing the Constitution so that fundamental constitutional rights belong to women as well as men.
Well, thank you very much. And this concludes today's episode of Successful Philanthropy. Our guest today, Carol Jenkins, human rights advocate, civil rights advocate, women's advocate, former Emmy-award winning TV journalist. She's done just about everything. I want to thank Carol Jenkins very much for joining us today. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host, and I'll see you next week.